we can have the mercy of God whenever we want it, by being merciful to others. For it is God's mercy that acts on them through us when he leads us to treat them as he is treating us. His mercy sanctifies our own poverty by the compassion that we feel for their poverty, as if it were our own. These words are from Thomas Merton in his book, No Man is an Island. And what you're seeing is the Underground Railroad Monument and Tower of Freedom by artist Ed Dwight in Windsor's downtown core. Ironically, directly across the street from our local police headquarters. These words from Thomas Merton and the Underground Railroad Monument calling out across the street to the WPD is our call to worship on this final week of the Easter season. I'm Pastor Rielly with Windsor Mennonite Fellowship. So after 400 years of slavery, Jim Crow laws, segregation, oppression, as well as police and authoritarian brutality, here we are. Black lives are still being murdered in the streets by those same satanic principalities, powers, authorities, and structures that insidiously evolve whenever they are confronted, in order that the majority of white moderates would deny their existence, even as they still leave a trail of suffering, death, and inhumanity in their wake. Precious image bearers of God still can't breathe, are beaten and murdered as they cry for their mother's comfort, as the whole world watches. Sadly, we still need underground railroads, passageways to freedom, mercy, and true justice. Now, to my white community in a time like this, first, let us take time to lament and grieve with our siblings of color, particularly the Black community, not ignoring, minimizing, or explaining their pain. 2, let us listen closely to the harm of the unheard, without making it about ourselves and our own fragility. 3, let us be in solidarity with their sufferings and needs through taking responsibility for our own part to play as the church, even here in Canada. As David Fitch recently commented, too often the church has not given the world any other option than to respond to gross injustice with anger and violence. If those suffering oppression have responded in violence, it's our fault as the church, the people of God, for not listening and helping create pathways to peace and justice. I have a lot to learn and a long way to go. But something I do know is, as white people, we have work to do. Our own work. As churches and individuals, we have responsibilities in this. So if you'd like to know more about working on internalized racism, becoming anti-racist, or decolonizing your faith, feel free to contact me. And I'd be grateful to share any resources, groups, and materials that will help you go deeper in this important work. Let's keep the conversation going, even when tragedies and violence are not filling up our news cycles and social media feeds. As Gil Scott-Heron says, the revolution will not be televised. As we enter into our message for today with heavy hearts, some of the stories and words I have for you will be hard to hear at first. But I want to encourage you to stay with me through this to the other side, There will be some beauty, but we have to trudge through some mud first. And before I begin, it's also important for me to give you a trigger warning. The following stories I'll be sharing today discuss subject matter like murder, capital punishment, and suicide. A few years ago, I had a Facebook dust-up with a local pastor. I deleted it, so you won't be able to find it if you go searching for it. I posted a simple news article that said that there was recently a drug bust and all sorts of drugs were taken off the street, like carfentanil and fentanyl. And I was just thanking the Windsor Police Department for taking care of that. Not particularly controversial. Then out of nowhere, a local pastor posts a comment under this article that I posted. And this is what he wrote, quote, "Drug dealers should be publicly executed and anyone over the age of 12 should be forced to watch." What? Publicly executed in front of preteens? Have you lost your mind? You're supposed to be a pastor. It was a disturbing comment and really came out of left field, and it haunted me. I tried to get my head around why he would say such a thing. Maybe this pastor lost a loved one to a drug overdose and is still very much angry with whoever sold him the drugs. That would be kind of understandable. Maybe this pastor is wounded and angry about other things in life and rashly taking it out on whatever triggers him online. But either way, not a lot of wisdom or self-awareness. Whatever the motive, something is fundamentally wrong, especially if a Christian leader thinks this way about people. What is he teaching his congregation? And around the same time, I went to a suicide prevention training workshop in the city taught by the wonderful local advocate and executive director of Victoria Manor, Lee Vachon. To begin the workshop, everyone in the class did an anonymous personal survey answering the question, if I was feeling suicidal, who would I reach out to for help? We were then asked to select the top 3 people we would go to for support. The survey included folks like doctors, family, friends, pastors, clergy, teachers, police, etc. They anonymously collected our responses and then compiled our answers into an infographic that everyone could see. There were some fascinating results from this survey. Among that room of 30 plus adults, the person they would speak to first if they were suicidal was their family doctor. Makes sense. You know what was 0? Who no one would talk to for help? Pastors. Clergy. 0 people in that room said they would go to a pastor for help if they were feeling suicidal. No one pointed this out in the room, but as the sole clergy person in the room, I noticed it and I felt it. These 2 troubling stories of pastor executioner guy and the suicide support survey caused me to reflect on and grieve a lot of different things about the state of affairs of the pastoral vocation. But one particular grief stands out. Christians these days are not known for their mercy. Despite our Lord Jesus being the complete embodiment of mercy in every moment of his life, we still manage to be stingy with our own mercy or simply have become so unfamiliar with the concept we don't know what it is, where it belongs, or how it works. Mercy is one of the most consistent and clear themes in the Bible. But from my observation, especially these days, mercy is among the least understood or practiced by people who claim to follow the Bible. We are so quick to become defensive, punitive, afraid, cherishing our resentments, and we are seduced into culture wars far from the love, mission, and justice of God. Christians will often posture themselves as hostile towards the culture and then feel vindicated as victims when they are treated with hostility, which is a kind of persecution complex. Our categories for belonging have become narrower and narrower, and we rationalize that as Jesus' narrow path. When all along Jesus' narrow path, the things he did and taught, are the very roads we're turning away from for the wider worldly roads of tribalism, scapegoating, rage, violence, racism, empire building, and a quest for social or political power. We have sold our distinctives and blessings like Esau for an insulating and impulsive bowl of warm stew. My dear siblings in Christ, we need to do some repenting, turning back and rethinking our path. We need mercy, and we need to rediscover practices of mercy. We sadly see the need for mercy as being weak, and unfortunately, when we see mercy as weakness, we are also calling Christ weak and then shutting and locking our doors to God as the Spirit knocks and wishes to take up residence within us. Our lack of mercy is pushing God out of our lives. I don't mean to just pick on the church, by the way. Mercy is something missing and severely misunderstood, not only among Christians, but in our whole culture as well, if not more so. If you think you're off the hook because you don't consider yourself a Christian or you're not one of those Christians, newsflash, the culture doesn't have anything to offer you either. Despite all the evidence to the contrary, people still think public shaming, classism, individualism, corporatism, violence, punishment, and revenge are all pathways to a peaceful, safe, and harmonious society. So if it's any better out there, where are the peacemakers? Where are the merciful? You know, in working with ex-offenders, I've discovered the more I get to know someone, the less I can dismiss them as just a monster or less than human. They are more like me than I'd like to admit. But our culture vilifies people all the time under the guise of a cheap plaything they call justice. We make all sorts of merciless judgments and decisions about people on piss-poor information that appeals to our indignation and desire for a sacrifice or a scapegoat. Did you know, in the Gospels, Jesus actually sees sacrifice and mercy as opposites? If you're going to have one, you can't have the other. In Matthew 9:13, Jesus says, "Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice." Sacrificing, crucifying people's got to go if you want to walk in mercy. It's been said that Jesus was crucified so that we would stop crucifying each other. But we're all looking for someone to crucify, sacrifice, scapegoat. Somewhere to put our own darkness, our own responsibility, so that we don't have to be seen as vulnerable and flawed like everyone else, and in need of mercy like everyone else. See, sacrifices aren't just for primitive religions. Modern secularism still wants a sacrifice, something or someone to pay for our lifestyles, someone or something to vindicate our own fragile sense of self-righteousness. those people are bad, we are the good people. Or we cruelly sacrifice someone online through shame in our quest to be right about all our opinions. Particularly for progressive white people like me, we look for scapegoats to appease our own insecurity about things like race, and avoid looking in the mirror and doing our own work to actually change our attitudes and behaviors that regularly harm Black lives. Exemplified by the horrific murder of George Floyd this past week by Minneapolis police officers. We are part of a system that fuels this kind of violence. These officers certainly need to be held accountable and face justice. But if we don't learn how they are a part of a larger system of sacrificing and scapegoating, one of which we are also a part, in Canada too, people of color will continue to be victimized in ways their white counterparts are not, such as white demonstrators walking into government buildings holding automatic weapons, demanding their rights to get a haircut with no consequences. And this is my point. We would rather have the soothing ego feeling of being progressive. We go, yeah, Rielly, that's absurd. Those gun-toting white people are crazy. Go Team Progressive. But we don't actually do anything to change ourselves or live in solidarity with people suffering oppression. It becomes just another placebo, another white progressive social justice placebo to soothe our own ego mythology. Progressive society and politics takes pleasure in calling out the less enlightened and then doesn't lift a finger to help them. So no matter where you're coming from today, religious or non-religious, spiritual or secular, as Ben Harper and Charlie Musselwhite's blues song asks, is there no mercy in this land? No mercy in this land. Like Jesus said, I think we all need to go away and learn what this means. The end of sacrifice is the beginning of mercy. Up to this point, you may be thinking, Rielly, this is a real bummer. Agreed. It's all a bummer, but it's the truth. So I thank you for staying with me thus far. I'm not here to give you all the answers, but start the conversation, and maybe we can relearn mercy together. This leads me to our local places today. Not just one place, but many places around Windsor that share one thing in common: street art. Whether it's the Underground Railroad Monument or the numerous murals in back alleys and on the side of large buildings, Windsor has an incredible collection of street art dispersed throughout our streets and alleyways. And it's one of the things I love about our city. We have world-famous street artists who live in Windsor and use our city as their canvas for inspiration that even spreads around the world. We're lucky to have folks like, for example, Daniel Bombardier, whose artist name is Denial, and David Derkatz, whose artist name is Dirks. Them and many, many more help us to see our city with fresh eyes, to value spaces that municipal governments or businesses have forgotten or forsaken. But people still live there. Street art is transformative and environmental, sometimes called guerrilla art, with permission or a commissioning by a building owner. It is not always meant to have a direct and obvious meaning, but instead, this kind of art exists to transform our perspective of a local place. Street art helps a person see the location it's in with fresh eyes and experience a kind of transformation in how they value the community around it. And here's where it gets interesting to me. Street art is often found on the forgotten streets, back alleyways, and abandoned places of a city, among the forsaken. The best art is created on the margins. And as a result, I think this particular kind of guerrilla street art has a message for you and I. It reminds me that these forgotten places and people still exist and have value. See, the street artist reframes and redefines something that was always inherently valuable and calls forth our attention. Secondly, it reminds me that mercy is bringing the margins to the center. What was not valued has value again. What was not heard is now heard. What was not seen is now seen. For example, there has been urban studies that show wherever street art appears, illegal dumping goes down. Maybe you've seen a place where people consistently dump old mattresses and couches. Frustrating, isn't it? When street art shows up, illegal dumping stops. It's almost as though a giant mural on the side of an abandoned building declares that this place has value and you will not pollute what is beautiful and good with your rubbish. To me, street art is a mercy to our city. When a derelict building or a forgotten back alley suddenly become an art gallery, we are seeing a kind of mercy in action, believing in and calling forth the good, the true, or the beautiful in forgotten, reviled, or abandoned places. Like mercy, street art reminds me to look closer, to notice and experience God's faithful presence in forsaken places. We often think of mercy as looking down on someone, groveling for a second chance. We think mercy is avoiding the consequences of justice if someone has been shown mercy. We think mercy is an act of leniency by a more powerful person over a weaker person, which sounds more to me like a tool of oppression and abuse. These things are not mercy. Typically, when I've heard the word mercy, I've thought of feudal systems, kings and queens, and some guy with an English accent going into a throne room before the king and saying, "Mercy, Lord, mercy." Sorry, bad English accent. But when I hear mercy, I think of judicial language. It's usually a word used when someone has been bad. Now, if you've grown up in church circles, maybe you've heard mercy described this way: grace is getting what you don't deserve, and mercy is not getting what you do deserve. I heard that mantra from all kinds of Bible teachers over the years. But here's the problem. This is not the biblical meaning of mercy, not even close. In the Hebrew scriptures, Micah 6:8 says, "And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God." You may be familiar with the rural prophet Micah's words from sometime around the 8th century BCE. The word for mercy in the book of Micah chapter 6 verse 8 is the Hebrew word chesed. English translations of chesed are many because translators struggle to find one English word that adequately fits its meaning. Sometimes it's translated as mercy, other times translated as kindness, unfailing love, a relational bond or agreement, compassion, faithfulness, steadfastness, or fidelity. All these words are fairly different, but they have one thing in common. They all say something about loyalty. My friends, mercy is loyalty. Compassionate, relational loyalty. Have you ever thought about mercy that way? I'm guessing not. Biblical scholars, brainy types, generally define hesed as covenant loyalty. When the scriptures say God is merciful, it doesn't mean God has decided not to punish you. It's saying the opposite. God is loyal to you, committed to you, in spite of your mistakes and sins and brokenness or harm committed against you. You will never be irreparably broken. We can certainly be wounded, but we are never ruined. And God invites us, you and I, to express the same loyalty to that value in others when they have been undervalued, unseen, unheard, unfelt. Like communities of color in the US or indigenous people across North America, will you be loyal to the image of God in them, their value? Or will you forget about them, sacrifice them, politicize them, vilify them? Will it be mercy or sacrifice, loyalty or betrayal? Think of all the times when people who were disabled, diseased, broken, poor, displaced, or oppressed called out to Jesus. They would say things like, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Now, this wasn't groveling below a scary deity who may or may not care. They were calling on God's chesed, God's loyalty, calling out God, challenging God to fulfill God's end of the covenant. Will you remember your commitment to us, Lord? Will you be truly loyal to us in our condition? Jesus demonstrates the art of mercy as something that calls forth love and beauty and truth from the margins and forsaken places of life, much like how street art calls us to value a place instead of forsaking it. Secondly, we need to know that mercy is a flow. Jesus says a simple but profound truth in his Sermon on the Mount. In Matthew 5, verse 7, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy." The next thing we learn from Jesus about mercy is that it's a flow. We either block the flow or give ourselves to the current. When we choose to be merciful, we are at the same time opening ourselves up to something transformative and beautiful, receiving mercy in our time of need. Mercy's flow can find us, but when we are stingy with showing mercy, we dam up the flow to even ourselves. And if you're a person who doesn't think you ever need mercy, just wait, you will. We all need mercy at different times in our lives. So I'd like to make some clarifications about what mercy is not as we wrap up. Mercy is not victim blaming. Mercy is not making excuses for bad behavior. Mercy is not staying in an abusive relationship. Mercy is not the absence of all consequences. Mercy is not coddling. Mercy is not minimizing responsibility. Mercy is not holding power over someone in need of help. Mercy is not condescension. Mercy is not being a doormat, and mercy is not passivity or inaction. My friends, mercy is an expression of loyalty to the inherent value of all people, even in the face of their fragmentation, their brokenness, or their sins. Mercy is the absolute stubborn refusal to believe people are irredeemable. Mercy is what love looks like in the midst of conflict. Mercy refuses to be defined by the same energy that created the conflict in the first place. Mercy chooses a different path. It puts a spoke in the wheel of violence and hostility. But most of all, I think mercy is loyalty to the image of God in all people. And this is why even sometimes we're called to love our enemies. So what do we do with this? How do we recover practices of mercy during the pandemic? Well, I'd like to give you some things to consider and to try. First, try showing mercy to yourself. Give yourself a break from returning to the shame of your past in times alone with yourself. It doesn't mean that we're not accountable for our actions. It means that we have new eyes for looking at the difficult and dark things that have been done to us and by us. Mercy teaches us that we're not defined by the worst thing we've ever done, nor are we defined by the worst thing ever done to us. Secondly, parents, in showing mercy to your children. If you're quarantined with your children or communicating from a distance with your adult children, practice mercy with them, young or old. It is not excusing bad behavior or not following through with consequences when they do something wrong. Practicing mercy with your children is loving them through their mistakes without catastrophizing or drawing conclusions about them as people because of their mistakes. Mercy is the trust and faith that God will continue to sustain and hold them well after you are gone. Show mercy to your partners. Choose to see them as people before you see them as a function or label. Husband, wife, partner, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever the labels are of people in your life, choose to see them as a person before you see them as a function. Fourth, I would say that mercy needs practice, whether it's towards your friends, coworkers, and especially strangers. It's tough to do something you've never or rarely done. Anything you've rarely done or have never done needs practice to get better at it. So don't think about the big things of forgiveness or mercy if you've been really harmed in some way. I'm not saying a simple act of forgiveness or mercy will whisk your trauma away. If the concept or practice of mercy is new to you, start with small things. Practice will help create the momentum to explore the bigger things where you may need to exercise mercy. You know, my girlfriend, Faith, is one of the most merciful people I know. Not just because she's dating me. That in itself is a mercy, I'm sure. She is incredibly merciful in the small day-to-day things and interactions with people. She consistently believes the best of people. When I'm driving my car and she's in the passenger side and someone cuts me off, I start mumbling and complaining, that person, they need to learn how to drive, blah, 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 blah. They're so selfish, blah, 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 blah. And she usually says, well, maybe they were in an emergency. Maybe they needed to get to the hospital. And I'm thinking, oh, you gotta be kidding me right now. Conviction, ugh. I think she expresses the desire to be faithful to the ever-present reality and potential of the goodness of God in a troubled person or in an unassuming place. Faith wants God's goodness to be true, and mercy is sometimes thinking the best of people instead of thinking the worst of them. Faith helps me practice mercy in those small things where I need to start. So in conclusion, I think those asking for mercy are good news to us. Their cry for mercy is a cry to be known as an image bearer of God. Will you see past your judgments? If we begin to understand this, then maybe we will open ourselves to the flow of the Lord's mercy in our own lives. So may the Lord show you again the grace and mercy that have always been offered to you. And may that grace and mercy flow through you and out of you as it flows into you. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord.